Welcome to the Leader Post Rider Rumblings podcast, episode number 152. Taylor Shire and Darrell Davis back again for another podcast as we discuss the Saskatchewan Roughriders and their latest win, which is now, of course, 2 in a row. And that's certainly something to talk about after what, 7 straight games without a win. We're now talking about 2 straight victories, 29-16 over the Ottawa Redblacks on Saturday. What are your initial thoughts from that game? There's certainly lots to discuss. But where do you want to start?
Well, after Labor Day, that's cool for them, right? They don't have to answer those questions from us anymore. What happens to you guys after Labor Day, even though it's a whole new group involved with this? But I knew they were getting a little tired of that. And watching them spiral was getting a little worrisome. But they had to beat Calgary. They beat Calgary. They had to win this week, too, against Ottawa's not a very good football team. Pretty good defense, but not much else going on. And, I think that I've always thought for most of the season, they've been overperforming, the Red Blacks have been. So I think the Rough Riders brought them back down to earth. But not much of a game to watch. If you like defenses, some really good defensive showings, but both offenses were shut down quite a bit, so that made it boring a little bit. The fact Brett Lothar was 7 for 7 is pretty impressive. That's why I call it the Canadian Football League, right? There's just so many field goals in this league, Canadian Field Goal League. There's just so many field goals. And the Riders need to finish their drives. Mm-hmm. They're not finishing drives, and they're playing dirty and getting a reputation for playing dirty. So 2 things that they need to do is clean up their act and score touchdowns.
Yeah, and you wrote about that in your column Monday, but Deontay Williams at the very end of the game sort of picking up and slamming. Some people think it was very egregious. Other people think it was minor, but you wrote about him slamming Pimpleton down on the ground.
What did you think? Did you
initially,
think it was minor?
When I saw it, I was like, it wasn't that bad. And then you see the replay and you kind of see him pick it up. I think the biggest thing is at that point in the game, when the game is over, it's, there's no need for that. There's really no need for that throw and to even make that pass, because they're not going to come back and win the game. So why even take a chance if you're the Red Blacks? Why take a chance of even making that throw to potentially get a guy injured, even not on a hit like that? So that, to me, was surprising to even see that hit. But there's no need for Williams to do that. He's a physical guy. He's a big hitter. He's aggressive. So that play should not be in the game, right?
Well, he got the most serious infraction you can get, right, Taylor? 25 yards and thrown out of the game. So he might even get suspended, right? We're recording this Monday, so we don't know what the jurisdiction is going to be, what the judgment might be from the CFL. So we're going to find that out soon. He certainly could, and it wasn't a very good play. And you're right, it's a stupid thing to do, especially at the end of a football game. This team's getting a bit of a reputation, right? The Miles Brown stuff, I know that we don't think he's a dirty player and there's not much malice in his game, but there was some malice in what Deontay Williams did. It's not as bad as Garrett Marino. A lot of people were talking about it, including Jeremiah Mazzoli, right? He was the quarterback who got his legs wrenched by Garrett Marino, and he's talking about how dirty the Rough Riders are. So they don't want that reputation. I know that Corey Mace, the head coach, talks about wanting to win with class, and he's going to try to instill that in his team. They can't afford, when they're fighting to make the playoffs, they can't afford to do stupid things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see if they can clean up their act this week as they get set to face the Edmonton Elks on Saturday. But going back to that Ottawa game, one of the biggest things that surprised me after the game was kind of looking at the stats, and Trevor Harris has a 315-yard game, yet they had 1 rushing touchdown, like no touchdowns, and I really don't think they got inside the score, what they call the green zone, the red zone, too many times, right? It was always sort of like they moved from the 20 to the 20 really, really good. And that was, they had only 3 2-and-outs the whole game. Harris would move the ball from his 20, his 30 to the other teams to Ottawa's 20 or 30, and then they would end up with a field goal. So effective that they were able to move the ball in the middle of the field, but they couldn't find a scoring punch, and that led to Lothar kicking 7 field goals.
Yeah, it was that way on both teams though too, wasn't it? The defenses kind of bent a little bit, but really got tough when it got down to the end and forced field goals all the time, which is what you want to do. But the Rough Riders just had possession more. You're right. When I looked at those numbers and I thought, Trevor, 315 yards? That seemed like a 120-yard passing game, right? Because they didn't seem to make anything really big. Obviously didn't go for any touchdowns. So that was strange to me. He didn't play badly. They just got to finish their drives, right? Earlier this season, the game that Brett Lothar missed 4 of his 7 field goals in. It was the same thing. You say, okay, well, Brett Lothar didn't do his job. This time he did against Ottawa. He did. He was 7 for 7. But why is he kicking 7 field goals? It's because the Riders aren't scoring. So they have to get closer. They have to finish those drives off. Losing players who they lost Sean Bain Jr. and Raquel Armstead during the game. Maybe those are dirty hits too by the Ottawa Redblacks. We'll find out what the CFL thinks about that. Losing those guys probably hurt their offense a little bit too, I'm thinking. So the Rough Riders have to find ways to finish. Whoever, they've gone through so many receivers now too, so many offensive linemen. It's going to be tougher and tougher to score if they're just working with a patchwork O-line and a patchwork offense.
Yeah, Bain took that big hit over the middle. He didn't return to the game. We'll see if he's okay when the Riders return to practice this week. Schaefer Baker took a hit early and left the game. And even Trevor Harris said post-game that he, at one point in the game, he asked Schaefer Baker, he's like, "Hey, man, are you doing okay?" And all Schaefer Baker could say was this. So he was talking in that he was obviously winded and playing through a lot. So we'll see if he's going to be fine, if there's any injury once all the adrenaline wears off. Even Sam Emilus left the game briefly for one drive. So
he got hit. Schaefer Baker got hit right in the solar plexus, right in the right. That knocks the wind out of you. It's scary at the time. We've all been through that. I think as kids, you land on your tailbone and lose your wind, and you're gasping. But it's a good thing that he wasn't hurt. I still have a little problem sometimes that I know the Rough Riders want to diversify their offense a little bit, but Schaefer Baker, they use him on that end around once in a while, and they give the football to some of their receivers to run. And I'm thinking, don't you want to be a little bit more cautious because you're losing so many receivers? Don't put them at risk on those running plays against those great big defensive linemen and linebackers. You may want to just send them downfield and concentrate that way and keep them a little bit safer. Although there's that crossing pattern by Schaefer Baker that he got hit pretty hard. So no matter where you play, it's dangerous, but I think that you would want to keep them away from the bigger guys.
Yeah, especially after a couple injuries, they pitch the ball to Emilus and kind of make him go end around, and then he takes a big hit based on how the defense is coming down and how he's trying to cut up the field. That play to me did not need to be called, and your top receiver did not need to be running that ball. I don't even know if he ran for a single yard on that play. It was,
and Emilus, to his credit, beautiful seal block early on. One of the running plays, short yardage, right? Shea Patterson was in it, and they brought Emilus around to take on. At least it was a defensive back he was blocking that time, but they do what they need to do, especially those receivers. So we talk about a lot of they've dropped some balls this year, but I tell you, downfield, they're pretty effective. That's the sign of a pretty good team. When you watch the receivers going downfield and blocking and opening things up, it means that those guys are committed to helping out their teammates. So those are good signs. They just got to make sure that they keep those guys safe and make sure they don't drop any footballs.
And Bertrand Hudon obviously had the lone touchdown. He came in for Armstead, and he looked good. I mean, to me, he's not. They're never going to put him as the number one running back and start him, but he's certainly a good special teams player, good blocker, and obviously, anytime he's played, I think he's been a good downhill runner. He kind of just puts his head down and kind of barrels forward, and he was impressive in the second half on Saturday as well.
Yeah, they're good guys to have on a roster, right? Who can back up in a bunch of different places. You can count on him. He knows the offense and plays special teams. And Canadian, so they're versatile. They're priceless. Those guys to have guys who can step in. It's going to be interesting to see how these guys move forward, how the Riders do in terms of running backs, because suddenly they had this huge running attack. It seemed like, and if Armstead is hurt for any length of time, that can really hurt the Rough Riders, because they really got a spark out of him in the game against Calgary. So as you mentioned, Taylor, they're not going to start Bertrand Hudon. They might go back to Hickson, and because AJ Ouellette hasn't been practicing, I don't think that he's going to be ready. Maybe not for the rest of the season, which is unfortunate. But they had found their big power runner, and they may have lost him.
Yeah, we'll see when the Riders return to practice what the update on Armstead is. Ouellette's been at practice as a coach, but hasn't done any drills, as you mentioned. Last I talked to Corey Mace, there was no update on him, so very well could be going back to Frankie Hickson this week, which is, I mean, he's a good he was a healthy scratch, right? So it's a good problem to have that depth, but they don't need to bring in somebody else from whether it's from down south or around the league to pinch hit this week at running back. So we'll see where they go with that.
Hey, we could talk about the nice turnovers, some great interceptions, right? Milligan, Sales, and Adam O'Clair had beautiful interceptions of Jeremiah Mazzoli.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, the same thing though, right? 3 interceptions and only one of them turned into any points, right? The O'Clair interception at least set up a field goal. But when you talk about the inconsistency of the Rough Riders offense, they get those big plays from the defense. Those are the things that you have to really turn into touchdowns because that will crush your opponent. So kudos to the defense because the defense played exceptionally well. Having Anthony Lanier back helped them a bit. Obviously, they had to juggle losing C.J. Rivas hurt them, but having Roland Milligan back in that secondary, what a difference, man. He's just a difference maker in every game he plays.
There's been a lot of talk about the Most Outstanding Player award, not only here, but around the entire league, and his name keeps coming up, and it's sort of that underdog name because you never really see a defensive back in consideration for an award like that. But based on the impact that he's had on this team, he has to be in the conversation, and it shouldn't be a quarterback from a team that's not going to make the playoffs. I'm talking about Bo Levi Mitchell. Obviously, he's been good, but he hasn't impacted his team in a positive way to get them in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless they make the playoffs, unless Hamilton goes on and makes the playoffs, then
you have to consider it, especially the way he's come back. It's been quite a story. You and I think, are among the many people who basically wrote him off at the start of the year, right? Yep. We were thinking, boy, he's probably finished. But the way he's rallied the troops and what he complete 29 of 30 passes of his last 30 passes at the end of the game to upset the BC Lions the other night. Good for Bo Levi Mitchell. And if they get into the playoffs, yes, he's worthy of consideration. But otherwise, if the Riders make the playoffs, Trevor Harris isn't their outstanding player. They've gone through so many different guys on offense that you have to look to the defense because it's been the most impressive and steadier part of the Rough Riders. So who's their best player? Well, Roland Milligan. He's turned games around and consistently makes plays on special teams too. He's a phenom on special teams, isn't he? For a while, he was leading the league in special teams tackles. I haven't checked the stats lately, but that's an impressive thing for a starting DB to do that. So he does everything for the team. And when it comes time to vote, Roland Milligan should probably be the outstanding player and the outstanding defensive player for the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Yeah, Jameer Thurman has had a great year, should get some consideration. I know you touched on it last week, but Logan Furland, he's probably the most, I'll say, valuable player.
Yeah.
Maybe on this team, if there was an award for most valuable player, the fact that Logan Furland has been able to play any position that he's been asked to play along the offensive line and play it at a high level, I think is just well, I guess it is outstanding. So I mean, he should get some consideration too. I don't think there's any debate for the top lineman of the year award for this team.
Yeah, nobody will ever vote outstanding player as an offensive lineman, but
maybe they should.
Maybe they should. What he's done, it's tough when there's statistics involved, right? The quarterbacks and the receivers get all the numbers. When Solomon Elimimian, the linebacker for the BC Lions, won, he's the only defensive player to ever win the Outstanding Player Award in the Canadian Football League. And he had numbers coming out of his ears, right? Because of the plays that he had made. It's tough to quantify what Logan Furland has meant to this team until you watch all the time that he's been able to fill in and play all those positions, Taylor, but not only just play them well. Right, he's not a weakness wherever he goes. So good for him. At least people are noticing him, and he deserves it. He's a low-key guy, local guy. So good for him. But he's not going to get any votes. I understand that, but you just got to appreciate what he's done for this football team.
I'd have to. I think based on what I'm seeing right now, he's probably the most outstanding Canadian of this team too.
Could be. Yeah, that's interesting.
MLS has had a good year, but not often does an offensive lineman win that.
True.
Win that award for a team. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's why they set up the Offensive Lineman Award specifically. It used to be a long time ago, it was the Shenley Awards they were called, and it used to be Outstanding Lineman, and it used to be Offensive or Defensive Lineman, and the Defensive Lineman would always win it because, once again, they had the stats. So then they've divided it into Outstanding Defensive Player and Outstanding Offensive Lineman. And, yeah, if Furland has a chance to win, of course he's going to win in Saskatchewan. Yeah, he probably has a chance to win it nationally, too, when you think about what he's done. The fact that he can play tackle, which is the toughest part physically, can play guard where he gets help and inside, and then move to center where he's playing now and call out the blocking schemes and snap the ball. Has there been a bad snap since he took over? I don't remember one either. So really impressive what he's done. So we're singing the laurels of a guy who who we realize what a great player he is. Maybe the rest of the league doesn't. I'm sure people who play against him are impressed, but it's not the type of job that gets much notification. But I think we've realized what a great player he is, and he could be a solid part of this franchise for a long time.
Yeah, and one other player, I don't think he'll get the consideration based on missing 6 games, but Trevor Harris, if you take into account, if you maybe pace out a season, if he wasn't to miss 6 games, I think he would be sort of the easy candidate for MOP just based on his numbers. They've been outstanding. He's put together wins. He's got his team in a playoff position, and he's looked good when he's been in there. Although missing 6 games, he's never going to be good when it comes to the voting.
True, and add in his rushing totals.
Yeah, there you go.
He runs when he has to. So if he can run when he has to, but every time he gets hit, don't we all in the press box? You hear us all kind of go, "What happened? Is he okay?" Yeah, he got up, and you kind of go, "Okay, all right." We don't have to write a story about that. That's good because you're right. He's the key there. Like we talked about Shea Patterson having a decent record when he filled in for Trevor Harris, but this team wheels around Trevor Harris. He's the key. He's the one who makes the motor run.
Yeah. So now we're getting close to playoff time. The Riders are on a 2-game winning streak. They're 7-7-1. They're now set to face Edmonton this week, and then they have BC, a bye, and then Calgary to end the year. At this point, they can control their own destiny when it comes to a home playoff game. And a few weeks ago, I wouldn't have said that was in the cards because I thought BC was trending upwards. Edmonton was starting to play better, and Saskatchewan was obviously in that winless skid. So, fast forward 2 weeks, the Riders have looked a lot better. BC, I don't think, has looked better at all. They've kind of tailed off, and Edmonton obviously got smoked by Winnipeg on the weekend. So the Riders are trending up, in control, like I said, of their own destiny when it comes to a playoff game. Do you think we'll be watching a playoff game at Mosaic Stadium come November?
It's starting to look that way, isn't it? They started the season with 4-game winning streak, and I think that they've got a very good chance of finishing with a 5-game winning streak, right? Yeah. Because they've won, as you said, they've won 2 in a row. They're going to Edmonton, and I believe Jarius Jackson, their interim head coach, probably cost himself the future coaching job with that team because he's messed up. Imagine a former backup quarterback messing up on your quarterback selection. Yeah. There's a team that I think wants Trey Ford to be its quarterback and isn't responding to McLeod Bethel-Thompson. If he's the backup, then the team says, okay, that's good. But our key in our future, and the new owner of the team wants to build his franchise around Trey Ford. And he's got a coach in place who doesn't believe in Trey Ford as much as he believes in McLeod Bethel-Thompson and winning now, which is what coaches are always geared towards. But I think Edmonton's in trouble. So I think the Rough Riders have a great chance to win in Edmonton next week. Then they play BC, and BC, man, maybe that's a team that wants Vernon Adams to be its quarterback because they're not responding the way we thought to Nathan Rourke. He's a good player and he's the quarterback of the future, but that's a team that's the toughest team in the league to figure out. But the Rough Riders are playing the Lions at Mosaic Stadium, so another great chance to win. And then we saw how bad the Calgary Stampeders are, and that's who they finish with. So it's within the realm of possibility, Taylor, for the Riders to start the season with a 4-game winning streak, end the season on a 5-game winning streak, and barely get above 500 because they had that 7-game winless skid and get a home playoff game out of it. I believe now, like you, a couple weeks ago, no chance. I thought, now I think that they are going to get a home playoff game. I
said a few weeks ago they needed to beat Calgary in order to be in the playoff hunt. They did that. They needed to beat Ottawa in order to. It wasn't absolutely necessary, but in order to be in the consideration for a home playoff game. They don't need to beat Edmonton this weekend, but I think absolutely in 2 weeks they need to beat BC if they want a home playoff game. Looking at BC's schedule, they have the Stampeders, the Riders, of course, and the Alouettes, who have already clinched first place in the East. So I'm going to say BC is going to get by Calgary this week, which if Saskatchewan beats Edmonton like they should, then the Lions will still be trailing the Riders by 1 point. And I think BC has a good chance of beating Montreal in that last week, just based on what's going to be at stake. And then the Riders obviously have the Stampeders, which to me also says a win. So I think it's going to come down to that game in a couple weeks, BC at Saskatchewan. The Riders have that 1 point, so the tiebreaker isn't necessarily going to come into play. So it's really going to come down. I think both teams are going to go. Looking at these last 3 games, they're going to want to go 3-0, and it's just a matter of which one goes 3-0 and which one goes 2-1. I think
you're right, and the one you would circle, absolutely, I agree with you that it's the BC Lions game. The biggest game that they've gone through over the last few weeks or months even was that Calgary game. If they didn't win that Calgary game, we had big concerns about the football team. Now they're sitting okay, control their destiny. The last of these games, the biggest one is the BC Lions game. You're right. You prove that BC is not as good as you if you're the Rough Riders and you win that one, and it's huge in terms of the standing. That's why I love single points for the ties, man. I know there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, get rid of the ties in the Canadian Football League." This saves us. You know what this does? The ties save us a lot of tie-breaking formula potentials that they have to use. So I have no problem with tie games. They played overtime. They tried it. If it didn't work out, well, that's cool with me. I like the ties. There aren't many of them, but when they come into play, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, and second place is still for the taking. Very well could finish in third. There's an outside chance they finish in first. They're 3 points back of Winnipeg, and Winnipeg has Hamilton, Toronto, and Montreal. If Winnipeg manages, I don't see it either. But if Winnipeg manages to go 0-3, then or even 1-2, and the Riders somehow manage to make up ground, I don't see it happening. But we'll see. We got lots to discuss in the next few weeks of the CFL season before the playoffs.
The playoffs? Hey, Major League Baseball is about to start its playoffs right now, man, too. So go
and
Brewers.
A few weeks ago, I didn't even know if we'd be discussing the playoffs for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So
yeah, true enough.
Glad to be doing that. All right, that'll do it for episode number 152 of the podcast. Darrell, thanks as always for joining.
See you at practice, Taylor.